Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on troubleshooting CircleCI Webhooks. If you're not yet familiar with CircleCI Webhooks, you can check a previous video where we did a simple tutorial introducing and using CircleCI Webhooks. And in this video, we're going to be learning how to use the Webhook CLI to troubleshoot common errors when working with CircleCI Webhooks. Now let's go over what we're going to need. The first thing we would need is a running server, a local development server, and I have one here. I have a Node.js server that's running on port 1337. You're also going to need a CircleCI project, and I have one here. I have a build here for a project to deploy a React app to Netlify. So that's the React app, or rather that's the CircleCI project that we're going to be using, that we're going to be creating webhooks for. Your code editor, and that's it. Those are the three things we're going to need for this. And definitely we need the Webhook CLI. So if you don't have the Webhook CLI installed, install it going through the installation page. If you go to webhook.com/CLI, you should be able to install the CLI for your operating system, be it macOS, Linux, or Windows. So let's get right into it. The first thing we're going to do is to create a Webhook URL. Now on my API, I have two endpoints. Just going to Visual Studio Code. In the routes.js file, I have two endpoints, or three endpoints rather. There's the root default endpoint. And there's an endpoint for logging a webhook and another endpoint for fetching the webhook logs. Those are the two endpoints that are going to be used in this demonstration. Now I have purposely introduced some errors into this project so that we can have something to debug. So the first thing we're going to do is to create the webhook URL. We need a webhook URL to set up a webhook on CircleCI, so that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to be doing that with Webhook CLI. So to generate the webhook URL, I'm going to open a new terminal where I'm going to run the Webhook CLI, and I'm going to type the command webhook listen and give it the port 1337. And then Webhook CLI is just going to do a setting up guest account because I'm not logged in into any session. So what will be our source label? That will be CircleCI. You can give this any name you want. What path should the webhooks be forwarded to? I want it to go to the path where webhooks will be logged, and that is the logs/log-circleci-webhook endpoint. Connection label, I'm just going to say my demo CircleCI server. That should be good enough, and as you can see, we have the webhook URL. Webhook has generated a webhook URL for us, and we are ready to receive webhook connections. We're ready to receive webhooks in the CLI session. So I'm just going to go to CircleCI now and create a webhook. To create a webhook on CircleCI, make sure that your project is selected, and I have my Netlify React app project selected, and then go and click on project settings. Click project settings. Good. Now on the side menu here, you click webhooks. You click the webhooks link, and as you can see, we currently don't have any webhook. To add one, we click the add webhook button, and we get taken to this page where we have the webhook form where we can create a new webhook. So the first thing we're going to supply is the webhook name, and I'm just going to call that my CircleCI webhook. You can give this any descriptive name that you want. And in the receiver URL field, we're going to paste in our webhook URL. That's the one that is copied from the CLI session here. This webhook URL. Good. Secret token. We're going to supply a secret token for authentication because we're going to be debugging that. I'm just going to say ABCD and 1, 2, 3. And show one certificate verification. And I'm going to be subscribing for the workflow completed event. And with that, we have our webhook set up, and I'm going to click on add webhook. Good. Now we have our webhook listed on the webhooks page, and we're good to go. The next thing we're going to do is to test out our webhook. To test our webhook, we need to trigger a build. So I'm just going to go back to my pipelines page on CircleCI. We need to trigger a build, and I have some successful builds here. So to trigger one of them, I'm just going to come here and click on the rerun workflow from start. But first, I want to make sure that my CLI is connected. So I'm going to go to my terminal and copy the login URL. Copy that and paste it somewhere here. This is the installation page for the Webhook CLI to install for macOS, Windows, or Linux. Just going to paste my login URL over that. As you can see, The CLI status shows connected, so we're connected and we're good to go. Now back to triggering the webhook. Let's go back to our pipelines page, and I'm going to click this "We run workflow from start" button so that it just reruns this build. To click that and wait for the build to kick off. Now, as you can see, the build is running, and once this build completes, once the workflow completes, we would have a webhook sent to our CLI, sent to our local development environment. So let's just wait for this build to complete, then check our CLI session to see if we have a webhook registered. So now we have our build complete, the workflow is complete, and we have a successful build. So let's check on our CLI to see what's going on. So here in our CLI, scroll down. Let's scroll down to where the ready information is, and we can see we have a 404. We have a 404 error. We're getting a 404 error which is not found. The webhook fired to our local development cannot find this endpoint. That's the endpoint that is going to log our webhook. However, with this entry, we can confirm that we're successfully receiving the webhook. It's not just seeing the endpoint that it's supposed to land on. So to debug that, let's copy the event page link. Just copy that. Then go to our browser and paste that in. Let's check out what's going on. We know it's a 404 error. Scroll down. There's a 404 batch here. So I'm just going to click that and get the server response. It says cannot find log CircleCI webhook. That means that this endpoint does not exist. But it should exist. But from what we're getting back from our server, it doesn't exist. So let's go back to our code and check that out. We're going to go to the routes.js file because that's where all endpoints live. I'm going to scroll to the webhook. Oh yeah. As you can see, I don't know whether you can see it yet, but we wanted to target the /log CircleCI webhook endpoint. But what we have here is a misspelled webhook. This is supposed to be webhook, not hook. So we just have hook here instead of webhook. Just going to take this out because it's going to cause errors and fix this endpoint. Save that. Now I have to restart my server because the changes need to be in effect. Go npm start. Yeah, the server is running again. Now I can retry my webhook on the event page and see if I get a successful webhook logged. So let's go back to the event page. Here on the event page, I'm going to go up and click the retry button. Then scroll down. We see our attempt loading. Let's see what we get. We now have a 201 success message. That's a 201 HTTP code. And when we click that, we can see the server message that tells us that our webhook event has been successfully logged. If we go to the CLI also, we also see this entry on the CLI. We go to the CLI, and as you can see, we have a 201, meaning that we have successfully logged our webhook. To confirm that our webhooks are being successfully logged, let's go to the endpoint where we can see our logged webhooks. That will be localhost :1337 /fetch webhook logs. I'm just going to go to that endpoint rather, and as you can see, we have the webhook log here for the Netlify React app. And this is an entry that is already in the database, so you can simply ignore this one. This is just a test entry, but this is coming from what we just logged. So now we've been able to debug a 404 error. Next, let's look at how we can debug an authentication error. If you look at the code base in server.js currently, this authentication middleware, this authentication check is currently commented out. This is the middleware that validates that we're getting our webhook from the right source, that is CircleCI. It's currently commented out. So I'm going to uncomment that so that the authentication check is in place. Save the file, then go and restart our server. So restart the Node.js server, kill it with Control C, and bring it back up with npm start. So we have our server backup. Now let's rerun our webhook to see if we still get a successfully logged webhook. Yeah. Go to click the retry button once again and scroll down in the attempt section. A new webhook is loading, and now as you can see, we get a 500 error. We get a server error. Let's click that to see what the server is telling us. When we click that and come here on the right hand side, we see a message that tells us that the computed signature that's the one we computed, did not match the one that was sent in the CircleCI signature header. That is CircleCI for dash signature. This header can be found here in the header section, CircleCI dash signature. So we're currently failing the authentication check. So why is that? Currently, we know that CircleCI is, we're getting our webhook from CircleCI. So this is not some attacker trying to spoof a webhook request to our endpoint. So something must be wrong in our code base. Let's check that out. If we go to this payload validation function, you see a couple of variables defined here. We have the header name, that's the header with which CircleCI is sending the signature, that's the correct signature. We have the algorithm, and we have the secret. That's the secret, the API secret that we set on the webhook form. Now let's scroll up to see where these variables are defined. Here on lines 10 to 12, we have the signature header, CircleCI signature, so that's correct. The algorithm is SHA-256, that's correct also. And as you can see, this is the second error. This is not the API key that we defined when creating our webhook. So let's fix that. This is obviously where the error is coming from. So I'm just going to change that to the correct secret key, which is ABCD123. So we'll save that. Go back to the server where the server is running. Kill the server with Ctrl+C. Bring it back up again with npm start. Good. We have our server backup. Now let's go back to our event page to retry the webhook and see if we once again get a successfully logged webhook. The event is queued, and yeah, we have a successful webhook logged. We are now passing our authentication check and once again getting a successful server message telling us that our webhook was successfully logged. And now if we go back to our endpoint, this application is using an in-memory database, so definitely you would expect that we'll have a second entry. That's besides this, we have another one, but because I'm restarting the server, the in-memory database is going to be cleared. But what I want you to watch is this ID. Watch the ID, and this particular ID ends with CID2. So I'm just going to refresh this page. As you can see, we have a new webhook logged, but now what indicates that this is a totally new webhook is the ID. This ID ends with 2542. In this video, we've been able to successfully debug a not found error, that's a 404 HTTP status code, and also debug a 500 error coming from an authentication failure. If you have gained from this video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more videos on CircleCI webhooks and webhooks in general, I advise that you subscribe to this channel so that you can know when we drop new videos. Thank you and happy coding.